my life. 24 and there's so much more. Live alone in a paradise that makes me think of two. Love lost such a cost. Give me things that don't get lost, like a coin that won't get tossed, rolling home to you. Old man, take a look at my life. I'm a lot like you. I need someone to love me the whole day through. I wanna look in my eyes and you can tell that's true. Lullabies, look in your eyes, run around the same old town. Doesn't mean that much to me, to mean that much to you. I've been first and last, look at how the time goes past. Now I'm all alone at last, rolling home to you. Old man, take a look at my life. I'm a lot like you. I need someone to love me the whole day through.
Well, Lee and I were very involved with the whole Western history business, and of course concentrating on what happened in Cochise County and very many tombstone events. And Lee and I had many a discussion, argument, and lots of fun over the years. And we both gathered a lot of information from a lot of different places, and we decided to write a lot of stuff about what went on there. And as the years went by, it became very clear to both Lee and me that as much as we enjoyed this stuff, we seemed to be going down different paths. And the interesting path that Lee took is one that shows up in his two very sound books on on the whole tombstone business. The two Wyatt Earp books. Anyone looking at those things is going to see all kinds of slants and viewpoints, angles, because Lee was convinced that a lot of people who looked at the Earp business, the whole tombstone series of affairs, were getting a point of view here, a point of view there, and Lee said he's going to do every man a service, and he's going to throw it all in the book. And that's what he did. So if there was a point of view about who was at a certain event, Lee not only mentioned various points of view, he gave the interested reader opportunity to look into these 5 or 6 directions and satisfy himself. But Lee felt that he was under an obligation to let everybody know that Lee isn't here to present a truth. Lee is here to present all kinds of evidence and viewpoints so that people can look at it and draw what they want from the voluminous amount of information that exists on a subject. And which is why, instead of having a library of 30 or 40 books on a certain subject, you could go to Lee Silva's book and you can find amply evidenced information about any particular good, bad, or indifferent angle regarding anything about a shootout or mining transaction or anything else regarding the Earp years in Tombstone. On a personal note, Lee's great interest in the desert and things led him to some very unusual efforts. For example, he owned acres near Quartzsite, of course, and he was raised in that area for at least 10 to 15 years, not in Quartzsite exactly, but on the Colorado River. And he always wanted to be tied to that area, and he was. But he lived, most of the time I knew him, in Greater Long Beach, and made periodic trips out to the desert, over to Quartzsite, to Blythe, to Yuma, etc. And we made many trips together. One interesting incident, he called me on the phone from Long Beach, and it was very sad to report that his trip to Quartzsite, this was in July, August of some year, the trip was not as he had planned it. The week before, Lee's dog in Long Beach had passed on after 5 years, many years of friendly living with Silva. And Lee decided that the dog loved the desert so much that he was going to bury him out at his lot in Quartzsite. So Lee boxed the dog up in a little comfortable place, put him in the van, and took off for Quartzsite. Unfortunately, the van broke down in the middle of the desert, and after about 6 or 7 hours in the desert heat with a decaying dog, it became quite an event, and Lee was finally only rescued by a highway patrol, and he was sort of embarrassed to tell the highway patrol man why he was outside of the van instead of in, because he couldn't take the stink anymore. So.
During the 125th anniversary of the gunfight, we put on a big show here, and many people who were born and raised here said it was the biggest event that Tombstone had ever seen. And I had a crowd counter here, and he estimated it was 1,000 people in the parade and 8,000 watching it, so that's a lot of people. We only got 1,400 people in town. Anyway, during this thing, we had timed down to start the gunfight at exactly the same time the real gunfight started. So the cowboys were to come in from the Allen Street gate, and the Earps were to come in from the Fremont Street gate. Well, the cowboys got there about 10 or 15 minutes early. I don't know why, but it came down too early. So we had a crowd of people waiting for the gunfight to start, and nothing to amuse them or entertain them. So I told Lee, I said, Lee, go out there and get in the middle of that arena and tell those people about the gunfight. He said, you want me to do that? And I said, yeah. He said, do you think I know enough about it? I said, you know about it than anybody else. Go do it. And he did. He went out and he kept them spellbound until the people got in line to do what we wanted to do.
My name is Scott Dyke. I live in southern Arizona, and Lee Silva was a very good friend of mine. I met Lee probably about 10 years ago and was down here in Tombstone, and subsequently we got together, half a dozen times I suppose, and we would talk very frequently on the telephone, sometimes well over an hour at a time. Lee always had a fascination for research. The word he used incessantly, provenance, and I respected his ability to do that. He, in his last book that hopefully will be published, he would call me and ask me to find different things I had that I copied from Glenn Boyer's files on Wyatt Earp, plus a little bit of what I found myself, and he would constantly double check, triple check. And then we would spend the rest of the balance of the phone call talking about all kinds of things. His interest, his life was interesting, to say the least. Abalone diver, extra on movie theaters, worked with Clint Eastwood, and was on daytime soaps, and was a pretty good, as he called himself, a pretty good saloon singer. He and a couple of guys had more or less headline acts in Vegas and in parts of California. So he was a certainly multi-talented man, and was very surprising. Had a great intellect, and was a very modest man. One of the things that I remember that I would bug him because I'd want to buy some antique pistols. And he would never part with the pistols that he had. But he finally found one, and it was in Mexico, and it was the Army issue Colt 45. And so I met him up at the Mesa Gun Show, and he took me on a tour and showed me more than I thought. I grew up with guns, and I thought I knew a lot about them until I spent about a half hour walking the floor with Lee Silva. I didn't know anything. He was amazing how he could spot phony pistols and all this kind of stuff. So he was a world-class expert, and of course those of us that knew him well understand that he wrote a series of articles for Wild West magazines on firearms, and he was the kind of guy that once he got involved with things like he did with Wyatt Earp, he was a bulldog and he stayed right at it. In Lee's last couple of years, his health was failing him, and I felt it was my job to try and make him laugh. So when I called, he would say, "Hello," and I'd say, "Well, you're still above ground, I see." And we start every conversation that way, and invariably he got a chuckle out of that. And he would say, "Yes, but not for too long." So, and we did research together on this last book, and like I said, I surely hope that gets published. And he was a real generous guy with his time, and I learned to really respect him and his research. So it's a big loss for me. The last couple of years, there's a lot of titans in the Earp field have passed away, and he certainly qualifies as one of them.
I have something in my hands here that Lee Silva's friends and fans might be interested in. It's the manuscript for his next book. It's titled Wyatt Earp, a Biography of the Legend, Volume 5, The Last Years or Days. It's got several of the chapters that Lee was working on at the time of his death. There's a little letter that he sent me these notes all the time, and a little letter that he included with a few of the chapters he sent me. And it's brief, and I'd like to just read it quickly because I think some of his friends and fans might be interested in it, and also it's just such classic Lee. Hi, Dave. Enclosed is some final rough draft of my next Wyatt Earp volume, still with lots of typos and a few things to change and add. But it is a basic draft that Don Shawput and I finished in writing in 1995. These are chapters 9 through 13 without footnotes or photos yet, which go before the two previous chapters 14 and 15 I already sent you. Also, I have included some early clippings about Frederick Bechtold. They provide the answer to where Bechtold got his stuff in his Saturday Evening Post article in 1919 about the Johnny Behind the Deuce incident, and in his 1922 book, When the West Was Young, before poor Stuart Lake got accused of fabricating Wyatt's part in the incident in Wyatt Earp, Frontier Marshal in 1931. I want you to have these just in case I don't make it to the finish line, Lee. And again, this letter is so classic, Lee. It's like one of the many notes that I have that he sent me through the years. And so I thought I'd like to add that.
Well, I knew Lee Silva for many, many years. We were good friends, and we grew old together. And Lee never failed to amaze me because he had done so many things and been so many things, and he had a story for every one. He would we would be sitting around talking, chewing the fat, and Lee would say, "Oh, by the way, that reminds me, did I ever tell you the story of?" And he had stories that ranged from UFO encounters, bar fights, almost was opportunities, life opportunities. He was an abalone diver in San Pedro. He was a saloon singer in Vegas. He had done more things in his lifetime than anybody or any group of people I ever knew. One funny story that I love to tell about Lee was when he was in college. He went to San Jose State and he joined a fraternity, and there was some other guys there, and Lee would get together and they would sing and play guitar and piano and whatever, and they would, I guess, entertain at some of the fraternity parties and campus events and whatnot. And after a while, three of the other guys decided that they were going to go out and make their fortune as singers and be professional singers, and they wanted Lee to join them, and they would have a quartet. Well, no, Lee was still in college. It didn't sound like such a great opportunity to Lee. He was still in college, and he was wanting to get married and one thing or another, so he declined the offer, and the other guys went on and called themselves, instead of the quartet, called themselves the Kingston Trio. And Lee lamented the fact in later years that maybe he should have considered that opportunity a little more seriously. But Lee, like I said, had stories from UFO encounters. One time he and some friends were in a bar in Alhambra playing pool and got into a bar fight, and Lee had a brand new expensive pool cue, so he turned around and handed it to the bartender and then turned back around for the fight, and the bartender whacked him over the head with his own pool cue. One thing or another like that was always happening to Lee. He knew people. He was came to Hollywood to be a movie cowboy. He sold cars. Unbelievable stuff that he did. He did an episode of Rawhide with Clint Eastwood, and later on, after Rawhide had gone off, he went into a bar one afternoon, and Eastwood was in there, where all the guys went and hung out, and Lee was talking with Clint Eastwood, and how are things going? Oh, really bad, since Rawhide closed. He had no offers. There was no work. Eastwood was thinking about leaving, getting out of the business, going to do something else. It was so bad, he said, that here's the only offer that he even had. Some guy wanted Eastwood to go to Italy and make westerns over there. Now, and is that a ridiculous idea or whatever? But he was so desperate, he made the spaghetti westerns his fortune, his career, and his name and all. And so that were the kind of things that Lee was involved in. And how he got into the Western genre, I'm not real sure, frankly. But he sure became one of the lions, along with Treywick and a lot of the others. Became extremely well known and very authoritative on the Western history, and especially specifically narrowed it down to the Wyatt Earp and his brothers and their adventures, and so he became the go-to guy for Wyatt Earp, and of course wrote numerous books, published several, and has several yet to be published that people are still waiting for. So Lee knew a lot of people and had done a lot of things and had a lot of adventures in life. And I will sure miss him. He was a very good friend and a good compadre. And once you were a friend of Lee's, you were always a friend. And he was always your friend. And you could depend on him. He would take the shirt off his back for you if there was something that he could do to help. That was just the kind of guy he was. And he will certainly be missed.
Lee's contribution to Western history is significant in many regards, especially his two Wyatt Earp books. Volume 1, The Cowtown Years, goes into deep detail about Wyatt's life before coming to Tombstone. There are approximately 600 pages with focus on Wyatt's time in a multitude of Kansas cow towns, including Dodge City, Abilene, Wichita, and Ellsworth. His treatment of this time shows the reader a different Wyatt Earp, a young man who became very skilled at fist fighting and who, contrary to popular opinion, was inexperienced in gunplay. No one before spent such time on this topic or provided such detail. Volume 2, Tombstone Before the Earps, explores the many interesting aspects of Southeast Arizona history prior to the Tombstone Silver Strike of 1877, including the Apache Wars, border smuggling, and cattle rustling. This really helps explain why this area was the epicenter of the western frontier, and certainly makes you realize that October 26, 1881, the day of the Fremont Street gun battle, is certainly not the only important historic event deserving review. Lee's books have a distinctive style. Lee's used 19th century vernacular whenever possible. This added color and realism to his work. Lee was also a master communicator and wrote to maximize readability. If you measure his writing on the Kincaid Index, for example, you would find the average person could read and understand his work. And finally, Lee understood that most people are visual learners, and therefore made his books visually pleasing by incorporating many stunning, previously unpublished photographs. Lee was an exceptional researcher, probably the best I've ever met. What's interesting is that Lee's generation of researchers didn't have access to or chose not to use digital tools. This meant, for example, to review a historic newspaper, they'd have to drive down to the archives, find the newspaper of interest, and then search for the information manually, which probably meant reading most of the newspaper. Using digital tools, one can find the appropriate site, identify the newspaper, and search by a variety of criteria, topic, name, date, etc. A much more easy and more efficient method of research. It is impressive that even given these limitations, Lee's research is still accurate and has stood the test of time. Lee also explored how the legend and the historical story of Wyatt Earp have blended into one. He had the background to investigate this. He was a TV show cowboy as a young man and very involved in the entertainment business, one of the main conduits used to blend legend and real life. Both volumes of Lee's Wyatt Earp books address this age-old question. I met Lee in 2008 at one of the Michael Hickey events in Tombstone, Arizona. We talked a brief time regarding his first volume. I bumped into him again in 2010 at Eldorado's celebration in Tombstone. He was signing his second volume at Linda's bookstore there on Allen Street, and we talked for quite some time about Wyatt Earp topics. Lee at that time gave me the referral to graphic publishers who went on to publish my Wyatt and San Diego book. We talked on and off, but really in 2013 we talked frequently, and I was doing a lot of research on the Harquahala during this time, and Lee was very interested in that and had generally explored that topic before. Lee grew up out in Blythe, which is generally close to the Harquahala Mountains, and was interested in that area. We did a joint lecture in September of 2013 for the San Diego History Center. Lee was always complaining about not being able to sell the remainder of his Volume 2 books, and I was always telling him to do some marketing events. Maybe we could do one together, and that's how that event came to happen. So Lee did a great job at that event, talking about so many great Wyatt Earp topics. He covered the Buntline Special. The audience just loved it. So after the lecture, it was time to meet the author, so we went out to the courtyard, and they were serving lemonade and chocolate chip cookies for everybody. So I was talking to Lee for some time. I decided to buy a Volume 2 of his work, even though I had a previous one, just kind of have another copy or to help him out. So Lee was eating a lot of those chocolate chip cookies. They were quite tasty. I had my share too. And I think we both had skipped lunch, so we were pretty hungry. So I gave him the book to sign, and he signed it. His hands were covered with chocolate, and the back of the book was all stained with chocolate fingerprints. Lee was a great guy, and certainly somebody I enjoyed talking to, who would always help you and just was such a resource on things regarding Wyatt Earp. He helped me a lot in many ways, and I'll truly miss him. He was an asset to our profession of Western history.
You